Metroid games have always gone all in on atmosphere. All the way from the SNES dark and claustrophobic undergrounds to the strange alien magnificence of Metroid Prime 4, it feels like these worlds are always more interested in asking questions than providing answers. This is probably deliberate and done in order to preserve the otherworldly yet ancient aesthetic that defines this franchise. But there is one exception. A world devoured from within by a secret that you need to uncover. And while the answers you seek are not evident at a first glance, they are never hidden from you. You just need to listen to the echoes.
It is told that the Luminoth were not born of Aether, but of the stars. In the early days, we roamed the greatness of the void, bathing in the glorious light of 1,000 suns. We met a vast number of enlightened minds, all of which had claimed the home world and formed a deep bond with it. In time, we decided to do the same.
Single-player sci-fi franchises centered on action and exploration, such as Halo, Prey, or Half-Life, usually start you off in the company of others, only to later isolate you. The idea, I would imagine, is to make you feel lonelier by contrast. But Metroid games have always been a little different. Samus is usually alone from the get-go, exploring a foreign, mysterious, and dangerous new world. And just like these other games, it always starts with a bit of setup. But Metroid Prime 2 goes from 0 to 100 real quick. When investigating the last known location of a Federation vessel that went AWOL after engaging space pirates, the bounty hunter Samus Aran finds a half-set-up ops base overtaken by hostile wildlife and littered with the corpses of Federation troopers, which quickly become hostile after being reanimated by some strange energy. She is then confronted by a mysterious doppelganger, transported to a dark and strange place, surrounded and ambushed by shadow monsters before barely escaping. It's a lot, and it happens too fast for you to be able to make any sense of it. I know that it was enough for me to drop this game as a child and only pick it back up some years later, which was a good thing. There was a lot that I would have missed otherwise. Can you imagine having a copy of yourself acting as you and wreaking havoc around the world? Not cool. Of course, there's no dark version of you, yet, but with today's AI, impersonating someone is easier than ever. Grandmothers are more vulnerable than ever when they get a call from an AI-generated voice of their quote-unquote grandson that's barely distinguishable from the real thing, or even a deep-faked face in a video call. That's where Incogni, the sponsor of today's video, can help. Having your phone number, your name, or your address floating around online is a whole new level of danger. Incogni works by tracking and removing your personally identifiable information from the internet by going after data brokers and people search sites that could be selling your info without you even knowing. Getting set up is super easy, and it gives me incredible peace of mind knowing how much harder it is for scammers to do anything if they can't even find me in the first place. And with their unlimited plan, if you find your data on a site they don't already cover, you can just copy-paste the link into Incogni and their team takes care of the rest. So take your personal data back with Incogni by using code BIGAST for 60% off at incogni.com/bigast, or by using the QR code or the link in the description. Now let us return to the stars.
For many a great cycle we roamed, yet a place to call our home eluded us. In time, we began to despair, feeling the search was in vain, until a scout returned with news of a world unlike any other. When we first beheld Aether for the first time, so great was her beauty that we forsook the stars forever to live upon her surface.
We don't think much of it now, but Metroid and Halo were trendsetters for sci-fi games, combining horror elements and unsettling soundtracks with action-packed sequences. But while Halo 2 moved away from having the whole experience be mostly solitary, Metroid Prime 2 leaned heavily into this. And when there are no characters for you to interact with, it's the world around you that has to be telling that story. I think the most popular examples of environmental storytelling are probably the FromSoft games, like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, which despite having numerous NPCs tell a great part of their story through their location names, their visuals, and the enemies you encounter. In the same spirit, items like the aromatic flower in Sekiro or the third umbilical cords of Bloodborne not only give you lore insights, but can even unlock secret endings to the story. There's something uniquely engaging in learning about a world and its story by actively interacting with it, instead of passively receiving information through, say, narration. In Metroid, being alone with no one to talk to means that all of the information you gather is through your suit's scanner. And I scanned everything. You can scan the alien architecture for some insights, you can scan the wildlife to get a biological profile of each creature's weaknesses, and you can even use the scanner to activate doors and other technological items. But nothing is going to yield as much information on this game's story as scanning the bodies of the dead. Scanning the mostly dead bodies of the Federation troopers gave me a general sense of what happened, either from looking at their wounds, where they died, or their last logs. They dug too deep and were overwhelmed by the splinters, a burrowing species of numerous and hostile wildlife. But I could also tell that there were older things here.
By the time we detected the stellar object as it streaked towards our world, it was too late to stop it. All we could do was take shelter and wait. Slowly, we ventured out from the shelters to see what remained of our paradise. All we saw was devastation. Half of the planet's energy had vanished from the energy controllers. Of the stellar object which struck our home, there was no sign.
There are two main ways to do horror games: action-driven horror and ambient horror. Action-driven horror places the burden of movement and choice on the player, usually by injecting tension. It's scary to act, but you have to do it in order to progress. If you don't act fast enough, you die. Think Five Nights at Freddy's. Ambient horror is more about putting the player in unsettling places, putting scary things in there with them, and letting the player decide how they want to navigate this environment, often adding tension through limited resources or safe places. Think Silent Hill. A good horror game can go all in one direction, but it can also choose to combine both. I eventually made my way to the abandoned Federation ship, where the video feed left me with more questions than answers. Perhaps more than its sister games, Metroid Prime 2 is scary. In the quiet moments of travel in between encountering enemies, the only sounds you hear are your own steps, the environment, and the ominous, eerie soundtrack. Reading logs like this one only contributes to the idea that the game puts most of its efforts into ambient horror, until you realize that the way it introduces action elements to its horror is through difficulty.
The day came when space was torn asunder, revealing dimensional rifts to a dark place. Horrible dark swarms streaked forth from these rifts, engulfing the wildlife and transforming them into what we would come to call darklings. Peace came to an end on Aether. Terror had become alive, and it came for us.
Nintendo games tend to be known for being relatively easy once you pick them back up as an adult. But as games accessible to all ages, they can be a test for younger audiences. And it seems that Metroid Prime 2 was preparing me for my future tribulations with Dark Souls. The mini-bosses in particular were both stressful and left very little margin for error. Everyone hates the Boost Guardian, but the Spider Guardian is the one that will forever hold a spot in my pantheon of infamy. As for the main bosses, let's just say that their sheer size is what makes them terrifying. Still, you'd figure that the first boss in a video game should usually be accessible, right? The Dark Alpha Splinter is the first real test of this game. None of the enemies had been difficult enough for me to bother learning how to strafe or how to time my attacks, and so this guy handed me my lunch on my first try. It took a few tries, but after defeating it, a strange alien artifact bonded with me. And as I ascended to the top of the abandoned temple, a song started playing. Though I didn't know it yet, I would be hearing this song again throughout my journey. This first time, it was accompanied by the words of a stranger. His name was Umos. He and the 29 others sleeping in that room were all that was left of the Luminoth, the people who once called Aether their home, until catastrophe struck. The same disaster that turned this land into a desolate remnant of its former glory gave life to a mirrored shadow, a parasite world that claimed half of the planet's energy and hungered for what remained. Upon this dark Aether, the Ing race awakened, motivated by a singular purpose: to claim the remaining planetary energy, fully bring this world into the dark, and snuff out the light of Aether forevermore. So began a war that lasted for 5 decades, and that was on the verge of ending mere hours ago, until fate smiled upon the Luminoth. The enemy warrior carrying the energy transfer module, the key to the final victory of the Ing, and the last long-lost hope of the Luminoth, was intercepted by Samus, and the module bonded to her suit. She is now the last hope of this dying people. Oh yeah, there's one important thing I should mention at this point. Umos is the one and only other living soul on your side. Samus will have to save this planet alone. I love video game soundtracks. I often listen to them without even having played the game, and while some are awesome to listen to on their own, I've found a common issue. The good bits of music seem to be reserved for boss fights and epic moments, and the environmental area music is often neglected or downplayed in consequence. Even though this background music is sometimes the best kind of video game music. The Dark Souls series alternates grandiose boss fight themes with very underplayed, quiet music for its environments, and sometimes uses no background music at all. And while that is an effective choice in its own way, to me personally it feels like the soundtrack loses an entire dimension, and the game ends up having to let visuals do the heavy lifting for the storytelling. I eventually understood that Anor Londo is a flickering shadow of its former glory, and that Blighttown is a festering, rickety nightmare. But a corresponding soundtrack could have complemented the environmental storytelling of these two locations. I just feel like something's missing. Then again, on the other end of the spectrum are games like World of Warcraft, where environmental music is king and clearly a priority. Zones, dungeons, and raids all have their corresponding themes, and the atmosphere, tone, and storytelling feeds directly from the energy that this music transmits. Grizzly Hills and Icecrown are completely different zones with different vibes, but the music is the strongest indication of how much each of them has suffered the wrath of the Lich King. However, while the soundtracks are very evocative in this game, the missions and NPCs that accompany them rarely leave things to interpretation, usually providing a very straightforward understanding of a zone's main story beats that kind of evaporates the mystery. In this regard, the soundtrack of Metroid Prime 2 combines with its lore objects to offer nothing short of environmental storytelling perfection. Every single thing you need to know about each zone is told to you by the corresponding theme, even if you decided to play through the game ignoring all of the other elements of the lore. Other than the main temple grounds, Metroid Prime 2 only has 3 zones: the Agon Wastes, the Torvus Bog, and the Sanctuary Fortress. And when you only have to worry about 3 zone themes, you can do some pretty awesome stuff. As their name suggests, the Agon Wastes are a rocky and weathered desert. Every step I took was magnified across the vast, empty expanse. The sound design in this game is built around the idea that at all times, you are alone. The Agon Wastes soundtrack is rather subdued and unsettling, but it is mainly marked by the distant, reverberating sound of a heartbeat. Is it my heart? Is there something else here? It's hard to tell, but the regular slow drumming of that heart dilated my perception of time in this ancient, desolate place. It complemented the feeling of isolation with this overwhelming sense of danger. Even when I was alone, it felt like there was something watching me. Always. Here's the interesting part. There's two ways to experience the soundtrack. The first is to get to this point of the game without having died because you're better than me at video games, and there's a decent chance of that. But it might happen because it's in the wastes that the game starts to ramp up the difficulty. Enemies become deadlier, resources scarcer, and save stations become more distant. Regardless, if you do die, this is what you will see. Holy, this game was intense, man. Like, you can literally hear her flatlining. And when I respawned and stepped out into the Agon Wastes, hearing that heartbeat again took a whole different meaning. What I didn't know at the time was that I was going to have to get used to seeing that death animation. Because you can't save the light side of the planet without visiting the dark side. There was something unnerving about seeing that huge portal. I knew I was going to have to go in there even if I did not want to, and when I did, the first thing I heard was this sound. That reverberating sound is all the evidence you need to understand. This is a distorted, wrong version of the world you have just left behind. Just as every zone has its own theme, there is a dark version of it. What I most remember about the Torvus Bog is how peaceful it was. When you look up, the raindrops hit your visor, and you can hear the thunder of storms in the distance. The soundtrack plays this repeating, charming motif that sounds almost like a bird's call, which is answered by another motif, and then another. Like multiple alien lyrebirds that learn to mimic the sounds of the abandoned Luminoth facility. And then I got to dark Torvus Bog, and the birds stopped singing. Walled in, strangled by the darkness, their melodies became distorted as they spiraled downwards into the abyss. A low, unsettling drone could be heard, a sort of alien choir, accompanied by a monotone single drum and that distant, backwards heartbeat, still reverberating in the distance. It wasn't as evident in a desert like Agon, but in Torvus I understood clearly that the Ing were not content with just possessing the life forms of Aether. They wanted to enslave them. To this day, I have never encountered a zone in video games that floored me so completely as Sanctuary Fortress did, back when I first saw it. After hours of playing through dusty deserts, rainy swamps, and murky catacombs, I was hit with the 1-2 combo of these insane, hyper-futuristic visuals and the eclectic, high-energy music of a sacred alien temple turned into a robot factory in times of war. It was exhilarating to finally venture into a highly technological sci-fi environment, and I loved every minute I spent there. Crossing into Dark Aether killed all of my excitement and sense of adventure, and replaced it with sheer dread. Only a distant, desperate line of Sanctuary code remains in the Ing Hive soundtrack, frantically crying out amidst the echoing drone before slowly fading away, leaving you with the increasingly louder moaning choir of the Ing horde and the unnatural heartbeat of the parasite planet. More than any of the other dark versions, this one really gives you the sense that you should not be here, and every moment spent in the Ing Hive is a moment spent looking for a way out of it. And that is the greatest success of this soundtrack. The light side being far more melodic and enjoyable is not just a representation of Light Aether being the world worth saving. The dissonance between soundtracks makes you dread every moment spent within Dark Aether, effectively making the combats, exploration, and even the puzzles you solve over there more stressful than in their light counterpart. And it convinces you, beyond a shadow of doubt, that the Ing are irredeemably evil entities that need to be destroyed because they corrupt everything they touch. Maybe this is a good time to mention that all of the main bosses of this game are fought on Dark Aether. Their themes are unique without a dark version, but given that all of them were entities formerly from Light Aether before being corrupted and brought over, the duality of original and corrupted purpose ends up woven into the themes themselves. Okay, by now it should be evident that the developers were very creatively reusing assets in this game. Every other area has a mirror version that you can access as long as you can find a nearby tear in the faltering fabric of reality binding the two versions of Aether together, and modify it using this game's staple weapons, the dark and light beams. While in Light Aether you fight off wildlife, space pirates, and Luminoth robots, or Ing possessing all of the above. While in Dark Aether, where even the atmosphere hurts you and the Ing do not need hosts, you just try to survive. And as you move across both worlds, you start to piece together the history of this war. Full disclosure, I did not play this game alone. My brother was beside me the whole time, watching me play. He made fun of me when I died. We figured out the puzzles alongside each other, and most importantly, we discussed the lore. As much as I would have been curious on my own, it was because we were trying to figure it out together that I enjoyed the story of this game so much. And I know for a fact that this is what started me on my habit of spending hours on wikis, researching theories and connecting dots. I think any game that succeeds in evoking your curiosity and pushes you to discuss its story has done something right. But this curiosity has to start somewhere, like a particular moment where it tugged at you, you know? For me, it was scanning the body of a specific Luminoth and discovering that they had taken their own lives. In the early stages of the war, the Ing would try to possess them, and sometimes succeed. This forced the Luminoth to learn of ways to resist possession, and if all else failed, to self-terminate before losing control. I don't need to tell you that this is the last thing that I expected from a Nintendo game. But what really fascinated me was the insight that it gave into the Luminoth. These sages were not a peaceful and meek people. When their enemy came from behind the veil of reality as one, they turned their minds to the defense of their world. But it wasn't until I looked in deeper that I realized the extent to which they dedicated themselves not only to this war, but to this world. At first glance, this seems to be a very simplistic story of good versus evil, light versus darkness, yada yada, but the objects you encounter within each area hide great depth behind them. Beyond their practical gameplay functions, they require you to be curious and to start reading between the lines. Object analysis complete. This is a statue of Deeker, the child hero of Agon. Once a lowly acolyte squire, he became a warrior when the temple was attacked. All warriors but Deeker were slain, leaving the boy as sole defender of the temple. He served Agon for nearly a centicycle before being lost in a battle on Dark Aether. A cycle is roughly equivalent to 3 years, which makes a centicycle about 300 years. And yet, Deeker is described as a child. This confused me until I encountered later entries that indicate that some of the Luminoth lived to see their 5th centicycle, well over 1,000 years. The inspiration for the Luminoth is not subtle. The elements of the moth are clearly reflected in their name and appearance. The main subversion in their design seems to be that unlike the ephemeral moths of our world, they are an incredibly long-lived species. Unless, of course, you're putting their lifespans against those of the stars. Still, it made it even stranger that they would be so readily willing to give up their lives for a world that is only a short fragment of their many millennia of nomadic history across the cosmos. After restoring the light of Agon and visiting Umos again, the song playing in the Great Temple seemed different to me. I thought back on the acolyte turned child soldier, on the 1,000-year-old star travelers that willingly gave their lives in this war. The music now sounded like a tragic lament for a dead race. In Agon, I learned of the history of the Luminoth, but it was in Torvus that I learned more about the war itself. Structural analysis complete. This is a statue of Beastes, a great hero of Torvus. Beastes led the charge in the Fourth Battle of Torvus, single-handedly killing the Ing Horde war chief in the battle. He died of old age within the temple he helped to defend. When I said that Umos is the only living being you ever speak to, I wasn't technically lying. In every temple can be found a Luminoth holoprojector, containing the final messages left behind by the guardians of each temple. But unlike their predecessor, the last guardian of Torvus did not have the luck of an easy, peaceful death. This absolute dedication to the war made me once again wonder what exactly could drive such willpower. Why did they have to die for this world, having seen so many others that could harbor them, meeting so many other races that could have been better fit to fight this war? Manichaeism has a dualistic cosmology that answers the age-old question of the existence of evil by presenting it as a fundamental, original force that exists alongside the absolute good of a benevolent God, not by its design, but despite it. Creation is the result of the eternal struggle between these two forces. This religion revolves around the idea that two worlds exist: a spiritual world of light, which is good, and a material world of darkness, which is evil. Within every person is a battle between light and shadow, good and evil, and through good deeds, human beings can return the light trapped within our material world to the spiritual world of light, and aid the struggle of good against evil. In a sense, Aether is caught within an inverse Manichaean struggle. The original material world was a verdant paradise, devastated by a celestial calamity that gave birth to a dark, distorted, incorporeal realm inhabited by parasitic beings that sought to steal the light of this world until nothing remained. Whenever they are not possessing hosts, the design of the warrior Ing and hunter Ing that form their armies is generally reminiscent of bacteria and ticks. If Dark Aether is a malevolent influence trying to spill into the universe, then the Ing are the microorganisms born from this spreading malady. And there is no guarantee that the light of Aether will be enough to sate their hunger. While there are some explanations related to orientation or navigation, the truth is that we still do not truly know why moths so desperately seek the light. But once they have found the brightest flame, they will never leave it. They are drawn to it by something deeper than reason. Beastes spent thousands of years traveling the stars, seeing hundreds upon hundreds of worlds. Traveling is all he knew, pushed forward only by dreams of the holy light so many of his brethren died without seeing, the existence of which many more doubted on their deathbeds as they faded away, full of sadness and regret. He himself probably never believed he would live to see it, until he laid his eyes on Aether. When disaster struck and the world seemed lost, perhaps the Luminoth should have taken to the stars again, looked for a new place, and started anew. But they couldn't. The Luminoth were not merely fighting for survival. They were waging a holy war for their paradise. As I returned to the Great Temple after reclaiming the light of Torvus, that song played again. this time, I did not hear a lament for the fallen. I heard the zealous chant of a people marching as one to their deaths, fighting in a hopeless struggle to contain a growing darkness before it swallowed the stars. It is in Sanctuary that the Luminoth lore tells you about the end of the war. In a last desperate attempt, they gathered their 10 greatest champions to try and find the keys that opened the way into the Sky Temple of Dark Aether, where the Ing greedily hoarded their stolen planetary energy to end the war once and for all. I will not read to you what the contents of all the Sanctuary archives say. Their titles tell a story of their own. The Final Crusade, Shattered Hope, Agon Falls, Torvus Falls, Sanctuary Falls, Twilight. After reclaiming the energy from Sanctuary, I knew that there was only one thing left to do. As I returned to Umos and once again heard the song of the Luminoth, I finally understood what it really was. It's a plea to the stars, calling for an angel to save the light of Aether. And as I acquired the keys and ascended the Sky Temple, a song started playing. It is an insectoid choir, a heartbeat, and a war drum. A triumphing, dissonant, stolen hymn, celebrating the defeat of a hated foe. A mockery of a prayer. I had entered the heart of darkness. The Emperor Ing is a three-phase fight that will test everything you have learned about your enemy so far as you face the first and mightiest of them, a creature that abhors the light of Aether it has enslaved, all while using it to feed its monstrous, bulging chrysalis. My brother and I both lost our minds after beating it. And then again when Dark Samus showed up right after that fight. Oh yeah, remember her? I mentioned her right at the beginning of the video and then never again, and I'm sure you found it strange that I never went back to her, but there's a good reason for it. Anyone who played Metroid Prime 1 would know that this evil doppelganger is also an outsider in this world, and its feud with Samus is very personal. In fact, it defines the Metroid Prime trilogy. But I'm not here to talk about that. In fact, I didn't know any of this. When I first played this game, I assumed, as I'm sure many others did, that the Dark Samus we encountered was Dark Aether's answer to Samus, a sort of antibody adapted to a new threat, and that she would be constantly interfering with me. What's interesting, however, is that the game itself progressively corrects this idea. She is the only boss you encounter more than once, and every time you meet her, she is doing the same thing. Gathering Phazon, a mysterious, unstable, and noxious energy, which can be found aplenty on Aether. While I was supporting the Luminoth and fighting this war, she seemed wholly uninterested in allying with the Ing, something I confirmed in Sanctuary after witnessing her mercilessly dispatch Ing-possessed pirates when they got in her way. That's when it clicked for me. Dark Samus was not from Dark Aether and she had her own agenda. She wasn't chasing me. In fact, every time I met her, I seemed to be the one interrupting. Funnily, the way it started to feel was that while I was busy saving this world, Dark Samus was just skipping cutscenes, power leveling, and ignoring the story of the game. And I think the game developers were very aware of that. Without the stolen energy to sustain it, Dark Aether's planetary core begins to collapse. And it is just as I was trying to escape that my nemesis emerged once again, overloaded with Phazon. But strangely enough, that boss fight was a walk in the park. The same technologies that aided me in the war against the Ing made this fight trivial. In the end, the same Phazon that Dark Samus selfishly and mindlessly gorged on is what you use to defeat her, leaving behind the collapsing dark world and the Ing trapped within it. Aether is saved. Dark Samus loses because she is a distorted copy of Samus Aran. She may be powerful, but she is missing a core element of the original. selflessness. Samus is not an angel. She's not a hero of prophecy or the chosen one. She's here by accident, and not because Umos and his people prayed for salvation. She didn't save them for power or for glory. She did it because she was the only one who could. Thanks to her, the light of Aether remains for a little while longer. As long as it does, the Luminoth will remember the dark echoes that haunted their sleep. They will sing of the one who saved them from their nightmare and asked for nothing in return.